Welcome to Asiatique. I'm your host, Dr. Raymond. Facing deep economic crisis and recently declared bankrupt, Sri Lanka was shaken by large protests just this July, which eventually led to the resignation of both the president and the prime minister. The president is also said to be in exile already earlier this week. But what we're interested in is not with what happens in Sri Lanka today, but how Sri Lanka's bankruptcy is being reported around the world. If you go onto Google, it won't be difficult to find numerous Western political leaders, newspapers, media outlets, and even social media posts blaming this uprising on a supposed Chinese debt trap. But how much do you really know about this debt trap and the way it's reported? Now this week, we'll have a look at this. And of course, not just from the Asian perspective this time, but from a factual perspective. Well, we said we're going to talk about Sri Lanka's debt issues, the China or the Chinese debt trap. Well, let's just jump right onto the facts. As of 2021, the vast majority of Sri Lanka's foreign debt, and we're talking about, well, amounting to something like over 80%, is owed to the West, not China. These include American and European financial institutions, as well as Western allies like Japan and India. Well, actually, the South Asian nation has a rather long history of struggling with Western debt burdens and have already gone through an amazing 16 different economic stabilization programs with the IMF, which, as you all know, is somehow controlled by the United States of America. I mean the IMF. And if you compare this with a mere 10% owed to China, debt trap, huh? According to official statistics from Sri Lanka's Department of External Resources, as of the end of April 2021, the top holders of the Sri Lankan government's debt, well, in the form of international sovereign bonds, are as follows, okay? First of all, BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, and Prudential. They're all American stuff, right? American businesses. Ashmore Group and HSBC from the UK, Allianz from Germany, UBS from Switzerland. And in addition to the above businesses, or the financial institutions, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, and the World Bank both share some shares of Sri Lanka's foreign debt too, standing at 13% and 9% respectively. And mind you, both the ADB and the World Bank are, again, controlled by the states. Now, while the US government is the only World Bank Group shareholder with veto power, they're also the ones behind, the Asian Development Bank. Now, indeed, through its membership in the ADB and with its Indo-Pacific strategy, the US seeks to compete with China in the areas of security and of economic power in the region. But it's not just the US that is there. Japan is there as well, and has rather significant influence over the ADB. Well, Japan owes some 10% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt too. Now, there's an additional 2% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt, and that was owed to India, and that number is steadily increasing as well. Now, as of earlier this year, 2022, India has become the top lender to Sri Lanka and has released some 5.5 times more money to this South Asian nation than China. Now, if you just happen to remember, both Japan and India are key allies of the USA and are also members of the Washington anti-China military alliance in the region, the Quad, right? Now, so altogether, these Western nations, firms, and allies like Japan and India owe up to some 81% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt. And China owns just 10%. And still, China's being called the debt trap. Seriously? And again, Sri Lanka acknowledges the important role of the West in its debt. The country's Department of External Resources also revealed these numbers to the public, but no one seems to care. So how about the country's debt in terms of currency? Now, as of the end of 2019, less than 5% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt was denominated in China's currency, the renminbi, or the yuan. Now, yet nearly two-thirds, and that's 64.6%, was owed in US dollars, along with an additional 14.4% in IMF's special drawing rights, or the SDR, and more than 10% in the Japanese yen. Now, if 5% is going to be called a debt trap, 10% would be a double trap. And what about 64%? Now that's a menace, for Christ's sake. Now that we know these numbers, yet the Western media reports on the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, however, generally ignore these numbers. They never report on these numbers, and they only use strong and seriously misleading expressions scapegoating China. And that the chaos, well, for example, the chaos is in large part because of the Chinese debt trap. Now, if you look back in May, when Sri Lanka defaulted on its debt, they tried to negotiate another a round of structural adjustment program with the US-led International Monetary Fund. And of course, not China. Now, this would have been Sri Lanka's 17th IMF bailout, but the talks ended without a deal. And because of the way these Western media reported on the news, Western media falsely blamed China's debt trap, well, in quotes this time, okay, for the Sri Lankan default. Now again, when 81% of Sri Lanka's foreign debt is owed to the, Western financial institutions, Japan, India, the Quad members, major Western media outlets sought to blame China for the country's bankruptcy and subsequent protests. Now that's the interesting part, the protests. Now what has these to do with that? I mean, yeah, there are these protests, but it has nothing to do with the Chinese debt, right? And even, you call it even the debt trap? Now, if you read the Wall Street Journal, just go and Google. They pointed the finger at China in a terribly misleading article titled, "China's Lending Comes Under Fire as Sri Lankan Debt Crisis Deepens." Wait a minute, what has that to do with what is the relationship between the two things? Now, the newspaper noted that the crisis opens, well, in quotes, opens a window for India to push back against Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean region. Okay, so you want to use this as an excuse to military strategies, right? In a military action. So, and even more disappointing, Associated Press, a very, very respected news agency, also tried to blame China. And because its newswire is republished by so many different outlets across the world, you can actually find misleading news from ABC News to Saudi Arabia's Al Arabia. And the same scapegoating happened in India as well. Just go and check. New India Express, Business Standard, The Print, India Today, as well as Japan's media giant Nikkei also published similarly fake reports. And definitely the same happens for the Voice of America. Come on, it's the US government's propaganda outlet, so they're going to be doing that, right? And which is closely linked to the CIA as well. If you check, you'll find their article title, "China's Global Image Under Strain as Sri Lanka Faces Debt Trap." Now, VOA accused China of pursuing a kind of debt trap diplomacy, and that China was trying to bring economically weak countries to their knees and hence be dependent upon China for support. Oh. Now, the same thing happens on social media platforms and are even more detached from reality. Well, for example, a veteran from the CIA whose name is Derek Grossman portrayed the unrest as an anti-China uprising. What has that to do? I mean, we all know there's no relationship between the two, yet they try to relate the two. And one of his tweets say, now just on July 9th, that China's window of opportunity to one day control Sri Lanka probably just closed. Wait a minute. If you are going to control Sri Lanka with just 10% of the debt or 5% of the currency thing, oh, wait a minute. So what happens when you have 81%? Okay, let's be fair, okay? Let's play fair. Not every Western media is like that. And some of them does report the fact. For instance, BBC. Now, they reluctantly admits that the Chinese debt trap narrative in Sri Lanka is false. Well, the fact is, yes, China has funded several large infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, building an international airport, hospitals, a convention center, sports stadium, and most controversially, a port in the southern coastal town of Hambantota. But then, when BBC sent in a reporter to Sri Lanka just to investigate these accusations of the supposed Chinese debt traps, then what happened was, after he spoke to all these locals, he sort of came to the conclusion that the narrative is actually false. Okay, that there is this kind of a debt trap. Well, according to this BBC host, Ben Chu, the truth is that many independent experts say that we should be wary of the Chinese debt trap narrative, and we found quite a lot of evidence here in Sri Lanka which contradicts it. And then he further explains that the Hambantota port, well, that was instigated by the Sri Lankans, not by the Chinese, and it can't currently be used by Chinese military naval vessels. And actually, there are some pretty formidable barriers to that happening. And then he continued that a lot of the projects we've been seeing, well, they feel more like white elephants than they do Chinese global strategic assets. The BBC also interviewed the director of Port City Colombo's Economic Commission, Salia Wickramasuriya, who emphasized that the Chinese government is not involved in setting the rules and regulations. So from that standpoint, the government of Sri Lanka is in control, and that it's up to the government of Sri Lanka's wish to flavor the city, the development of the city, in the way it wants to. And she continued, it is accurate to say that the infrastructure development has boomed under Chinese investment. Chinese debt sometimes, but those are things that we've actually needed a long time. Now, so the verdict, according to the BBC host, it's not debt, but equity the Chinese own there in Sri Lanka. Well, even the mainstream US academic debunked the Chinese debt trap myth. Mainstream Western academics have similarly investigated the claims of the Chinese debt traps and came to the conclusion that they don't exist. Now, a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, which is notorious for its revolving door with the US government and close links to spy agencies, acknowledged that the Chinese debt trap is a myth. Writing in 2021 in the de facto mouthpiece of the DC political establishment, The Atlantic magazine, scholar Deborah Boytenkamp stated clearly that the debt trap narrative is a lie and a powerful one. Now, what she found out was that Chinese banks are willing to restructure the terms of existing loans that have never actually seized an asset from the country, much less the port of Hambantota. Boytenkamp's team investigated Chinese loans in Sri Lanka, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Angola, and the Republic of Congo, and they found no asset seizure. And despite contract clauses requiring arbitration, absolutely no evidence of the use of courts to enforce payments or application of penalty interest rates. So they discovered that China actually canceled more than $3.4 billion and restructured or refinanced roughly around $15 billion of debt in Africa between 2000 and 2019, where at least 26 individual loans to African nations were renegotiated. So Western critics have attacked China. Yes, they have attacked China, claiming there is a lack of transparency surrounding its loans. But according to Boytenkamp, she explained that Chinese leaders prefer to address restructuring in a very quiet way, on a bilateral basis, tailoring programs to each situation. The researchers noted that China puts an emphasis on development sustainability, looking at the future contribution of the project, rather than debt sustainability, which is looking at the current state of the economy as the basis of project lending decisions. And moreover, despite critics' worries that China could seize its borrowers' assets, they actually found that China never attempted to take advantage of countries in debt distress. Well, this is what they added, okay? And there were no asset seizures in the 16 restructuring cases that they have actually checked. So, we have not yet seen cases in Africa where Chinese banks or companies have sued sovereign governments or exercised the option of international arbitration standard in Chinese loan contracts. Well, and that is how they concluded the research. So, to round up, the Chinese debt trap is obviously just a political illusion of the West, if not at all, or simply a delusion. So, until then, ciao.
Before you leave, please be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with your friends. See you in the next episode.